your fertility is actually an overall sign of your health as a woman, because if your cycles are off, I know I hear a lot in my practice that women will tell me, oh, I have a cycle every 6 months, but that's normal for me. That's not normal.
We want to empower you to make fully informed choices about your pregnancy and parenting options. Let's talk about what's next now that pregnancy has entered the chat. Welcome back to Pregnancy Has Entered the Chat. Today we have our first repeat guest on the podcast, Beth Appiah. Beth is a registered nurse at the Pregnancy Network. She is currently working on her Family Nurse Practitioner degree and hopes to specialize in women's health. She's extremely knowledgeable on the topic we're discussing today, which is fertility awareness methods. Whether you're curious about different methods of birth control or you're hoping to grow your family, fertility awareness is a powerful tool to help you know your body and plan your family. Beth, I'm so excited about our conversation today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and talk about this.
This is such an important topic, and it's one that you explained to the women that we serve and that you've explained to some of our staff and has been so helpful. So for those who may not know, what is fertility awareness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, in a short summary, fertility awareness is the ability for you to track your own personal fertility. There are certain things that are similar between every woman, but every woman ovulates and has their own fertility that's a little bit different from woman to woman. So this is a way for you to track your own personal, also just for your own health awareness, but also to help you meet your family planning goals as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's some practical pieces of information that you can take it and apply it to yourself. So
exactly.
I'm very excited to go over that today. So starting out super basic, but super helpful, can you discuss the phases of a woman's cycle?
Absolutely. So I'm going to just do more of an abridged version. There are very specific phases that can go into a lot more detail, but I'm going to cover the four main. So the first part of the cycle is what most women know as the period, which is what we call the menstrual phase. And that's when you start a new cycle. And that lasts anywhere from averaging from 5 to 7 days for most women. After you end the period or the menstrual phase, you're going to start the follicular phase of your cycle. And during this phase is when your eggs are maturing. So one egg usually per cycle. And so you will have a couple eggs that are going to be maturing during the follicular phase and getting ready to be released. During the follicular phase, at the very end of it, your estrogen levels are going to start to rise. And this is an indication that you're going to get closer to the next phase, which is what we call the ovulation or ovulatory phase. During this phase, your estrogen levels are the highest, and you also have something called luteinizing hormone. And this is when you're going to release the egg from the follicles in your fallopian tube to be prepared for fertilization. And that's usually on average for women anywhere from day 14 to day 16. But again, it's going to vary per cycle. And that's why that fertility awareness and tracking is really important, because every woman's a little bit different. But usually on average, anywhere from day 14 to day 16 is when most women will ovulate and release that egg for fertilization. Or I should say for potential fertilization. And then after the ovulatory phase is finished, you're going to enter the luteal phase. And this is the last part of your cycle. And this is anywhere from day 15, 16 from after you've ovulated to the beginning of your next cycle. And during this phase, your estrogen levels are going to drop drastically and your progesterone levels are going to rise quite a bit. And then right before you start your next period, your progesterone levels will drop again, and then you'll enter another cycle.
Okay. That is awesome. It's really cool how there is that, variation between women, but that those predictable 4 phases of the cycle are going to happen every month, and we can learn about them. And that's impactful for the way the decisions we make and the way we go about our health.
Exactly. Yes. And it's very important to keep in consideration. I know a lot of times with Western medicine, and not all doctors are well informed necessarily on the cycles of women and how they work and the different phases and how each one is a little bit different for each woman. But it's important to know and speak to your doctor about this, that your fertility is actually an overall sign of your health as a woman. Because if your cycles are off, I know I hear a lot in my practice that women women will tell me, oh, I have a cycle every 6 months, but that's normal for me. That's not normal. It's not normal unless you're taking some kind of synthetic birth control that's preventing estrogen levels to rise, that's preventing a period. Otherwise, if you're not, it's not normal for you to just be having a cycle here, there, and otherwise. It's an indication that there may be some hormonal deficiencies going on. It's important to have that testing done to make sure that you're in your optimal health as well.
Yeah. That is wonderful. So what are some common symptoms during each phase of a woman's cycle, specifically those phases that we may not be as familiar with? People are familiar maybe with their period symptoms or their menstrual phase symptoms, but if you could just go into detail about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love this question because a lot of women don't know what's happening when. They just like, well, I have mood swings here or this happens. But really kind of knowing what's happening when to your body is a great way of breaking that down. So the number one thing I like to speak to women about is when you hit phase 2, or what we know as the ovulatory phase. For most women, their libido or their sex drive is going to rise exponentially. And that's because the way our species has been created, we are designed to procreate in the sense that we are designed to populate our species, right? So we need that sex drive to be higher for us desire to have sex, to desire to potentially procreate, right? So that's a great sign indication for you as a woman. Usually your sex drive will rise anywhere from 1 maybe to 2 days before you would ovulate. Sometimes it's a little bit closer to ovulation, but usually it's in that realm. So that's a great indication for you. If you notice that you have a higher sex drive or higher libido, that you may be getting ready to ovulate. Another thing that happens that a lot of women that I speak to, they say, I think I have bacterial vaginosis because my vaginal discharge has changed. A lot of women don't realize that your cervical mucus will fluctuate with your cycle. So at the beginning of your cycle, when you're in phase 1 or that menstrual period follicular phase, you're going to have anywhere from dry to tacky to sticky mucus. So when you wipe, you might realize it's really dry or there's just not a lot of lubrication. So you get closer to your ovulatory phase, it's going to become slippery, wet when you wipe. And then you might notice you have what's like egg white consistency cervical mucus. That's the luteinizing hormone has risen. And that's a sign that you're going to ovulate within 12 to 36 hours. Okay. So those cervical mucus changes are another great way for you to figure out what phase, where am I in my period, and be tracking that so that you can kind of have a better idea. Another thing that I hear a lot from women is they complain about, I think I'm just moody. I think I need medication. Something's wrong with me. I'm like, no, you're probably in your 3rd phase, which is your luteal phase. And for most women, that's when your progesterone levels rise exponentially. And for a lot of women, when their estrogen drops, their mood drops because estrogen actually helps you take in more serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone. So when that drops and your progesterone rises, sometimes you just feel more like, oh man, I don't have as much energy, or, oh, I'm just more tired, or I feel like I'm more moody. So what I tell women is that just means you're done ovulating, and it just means give yourself a little bit more gentle, loving care, do the things that fill you up, give yourself more time to get tasks done. Some women even experience some brain fog, forgetfulness during that part of your phase. I'm here to tell you there's nothing wrong with you. That's just your hormones fluctuating, and you'll hit that phase a different time in your cycle and you'll feel better in the next cycle as well.
That is so helpful. I mean, just for even the day-to-day, like it's super helpful for our fertility, but also for me, if I'm doing a workout and it feels a little harder, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And then it's like, no, I'm probably just in my luteal phase. Like my energy's dropped and all these different things. Like so many spheres of life that this knowledge equips you to, give yourself a little bit of that extra gentleness, or, like, oh, I'm ovulating, like different decisions you can make during that time. So
Exactly. It's not just for family planning, though that is a great tool you can use it for. It is just an overall awareness of what's happening to your body when, and that's really powerful for women.
Yeah. We say a lot here, knowledge is power. And this is a huge piece of having that knowledge within yourself and making those informed decisions.
For sure. Absolutely.
So can you explain some common misconceptions about fertility awareness?
Yes, absolutely. Probably the one that I hear most frequently. So fertility awareness and something called natural family planning, if you've heard of that, usually go hand in hand. So one thing that I've heard a lot of people tell me, because over the years, this is kind of how fertility awareness was looked at, or natural family planning, was that, oh, it's just the calendar method. In other words, you just pick a random day in the calendar and you say, oh, I think that's probably when I would have ovulated. Or another one I hear is that, oh, I can't use fertility awareness or natural family planning because I have irregular cycles due to PCOS or something like that. So what I usually tell to women like that is now natural family planning and fertility awareness is backed 100% by science. So it's not just picking your random day. You're measuring your hormones. You're tracking your fertility signs. And there's studies, years of studies that have been done by OBGYNs, MDs, who have actually come up with these certain methods that we'll talk about a little bit later that are proven to be just as effective or more effective than other types of birth control. So it's not what it was 15, 20 years ago. There was that, but it is a very different type of family planning and fertility awareness that we actually use science-based today. So far as the other aspect that we get, whereas I can't use it because I have irregular cycles, and you will even see this if you Google it, it will say, not for women who have irregular periods. I'm here to tell you that is 100% false because I work and teach women who have PCOS, who have hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, or have hormone imbalances. And I will actually say this is even more important for you because when you are tracking and you have 6 months of tracking, this is my symptoms here. This is when I think I ovulated. This is when my period came. And you bring that to your doctor, they can say, oh, I'm going to pinpoint this, and this is what I think is going on. We're going to test this hormone, and that hormone. And a lot of times we can actually correct the cause of what's causing the irregular cycles. We're not here to give you birth control and put a Band-Aid on it. We're here to try to figure out what's causing it so we can fix that and then hopefully in turn regulate it.
Yeah, that is really, the science is conclusive and it's there and the studies are done that this is not just risky. You're kind of guessing what's going on when, because I do think that is the biggest pushback of, well, I'm not comfortable just, looking at the calendar and saying probably I ovulated this day, but
and I wouldn't be either.
Yeah.
I would definitely not, because as a medical professional, I would not advocate that for women.
Yeah.
But the truth is I've used natural family planning for myself for my 10 years of marriage, and everything has been 100% planned and worked 100% as I would expect it to.
Yeah.
So, science, I'm all about not pushing something that is not backed by science, especially when it comes to women's health.
For sure.
So for sure, this is important to talk about.
Can you explain some of the specific fertility awareness methods?
Absolutely. So there's several different kind of, spin-offs on some, but the three main ones that most women are going to hear about or are going to be given if they have questions about natural family planning or fertility awareness is first the cervical mucus, or what's known as the Creighton model method. So with that one, I know I briefly talked about that, but your cervical mucus will change and fluctuate throughout your cycle. So basically this method is where you're going to have an instructor. You'll work with an instructor from anywhere from 3 to 6 months for them to gauge your own personal fertility. And the instructors will be nurses. They'll be medical professionals. So they'll be working again with science to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date scientific material, right? And they're going to teach you how to track your cervical mucus changes. So you'll start off, usually most women, with dry, tacky mucus. And then as you get closer to ovulation, your mucus will change to that slippery, then to that egg white consistency. Then you'll go back to the dry, tacky. So they're going to teach you what's happening when and how to track your cervical mucus, so then you can know when to engage in sexual intercourse to either have a child or to not, depending on your family planning goals. So that's the first one that a lot of women love. One, because it's very effective, but also two, it's very cost effective as well, right? Except for those first few months where you will work with an instructor, and there's usually some type of fee, though speak with an instructor individually if you have financial needs, because a lot of them will do it for free or very reduced if you need that, because they're very big advocates on making sure you get the best quality care for you. The other method that's also very common is called the symptothermal method. And this is where you're going to basically take your temperature every day throughout a cycle. So when your progesterone levels rise after ovulation, your body temperature will rise. So basically with this method, you're going to be tracking your temperature, your basal body temperature throughout the entire cycle. So you'll start off at a pretty average, like 98.6. Then as you get closer to ovulating, you're going to have a huge dip in your basal body temperature. And then right after you've ovulated, your temperature will rise exponentially, right? So with you tracking that temperature, you can track down to 1 or 2 days exactly when you ovulated. And then you can confirm when you ovulated when your basal body temperature rises above the normal at the beginning. And again, this is very cost effective. All you need is a thermometer. You will work with an instructor again who will teach you all the basics of how to take your temperature, when's the most effective time, how to avoid intercourse if you don't want to conceive, and how to and when to if you do want to conceive. The last method, and the one that I'm super passionate about because I use it, I love it, it's super user-friendly, is the Marquette method. And this is the one that I teach as a provider as well. And so this one is actually where you're going to measure your hormone levels every single day throughout your cycle. And you're going to do that by actually peeing in a cup every morning, and you're going to put a stick in that cup and you're going to measure it, and you're going to have a monitor. And that monitor will tell you what hormone is currently elevated in your period. And it will also tell you, so at the beginning of your cycle, when you're least fertile after you come off of your period or when you're on your period, it will tell you whether your chances of conceiving are low, high, or you're peaking. That means you're about ready to ovulate. So it will tell you estrogen levels are low. So your chances of conceiving are low. And then once you detects that your estrogen levels are starting to rise, it will say high, meaning that if you have engaged in sexual intercourse now without protection, the chances of you conceiving are high. Then when it detects the luteinizing hormone, that's what is released right before you ovulate, it will say peak. That means you're going to ovulate in 12 to 36 hours. So if you want to conceive, now's the time. It has a great big smiley face on the monitor to let you know. Like, you can't miss it.
That's awesome.
And then once you've passed that peak period, it will go ahead and start to say low again, because it'll say, okay, estrogen levels have dropped, progesterone is high. Now the chances of you conceiving are very low. Because after you ovulate, that egg only survives for 12 to 36 hours. So typically speaking, if you want to conceive, sexual intercourse should happen prior to ovulation. You can conceive after ovulation, but you have about 1 day. It's pretty tight. So usually you want to prepare ahead of time. So that is my personal method, because you don't necessarily have to track cervical mucus changes unless you want to. I do, just because I like that added thing, but you don't have to. And it's basically reading your hormones. So it's pretty 100% accurate. And you get to see exactly what your chances are for conceiving day by day. The only caveat to that one is you do have to pay for the monitor. So that has a fee, and then you will pay for the test sticks every month. But the test sticks are about $20. And sometimes you can get them in a big batch for a much reduced price. And again, you're going to work with an instructor who will teach you the method step by step, go through everything with you. And then once you're done and you've learned it, you're on your own and you're free to do it. And like I said, I've used it for 10 years now. Absolutely love it. I wouldn't do anything else. So those are the three main ones.
Okay. Yeah, that is wonderful that there's those options and that you can use them in conjunction with each other, like you mentioned, because the third one, Marquette method, it sounds like super precise. And I'm sure for people who like really love to be informed, that's so helpful to know, like, okay, my estrogen's dropped, or my progesterone's rising, or my estrogen's rising, and have that really hard evidence for that. But then there's also those methods that you can do for almost free, like tracking your basal body temperature in combination with your cervical mucus. So I love that there's all those options, that people have taken the time to study this. It's so important.
For sure. Yeah. And that's the main thing with each method, Marquette included. There are years of studies, anywhere from 200 to 800 to sometimes thousands of participants that are being tracked, that are making sure that we're checking the user effectiveness, the method effectiveness, so that we're making sure, again, that we're producing something that's effective for women to use.
Yeah. So how effective are these fertility awareness methods?
Yes, another great question, because if you Google it, it won't be a great answer. But based on studies, the methods themselves are very accurate, anywhere from 97 to 99% effective, right? Now, we're all human. So you got to kind of calculate that user error into the rates. And so for user effectiveness, that can range anywhere from 93 to 97% effectiveness, depending on the method you use. I will say Marquette method has some of the highest effectiveness, just because, again, you are measuring those hormones every single day. So you have more of a documented, this is what's happening with my body here. But it's just important that you are tracking what's happening to your cervical mucus as well if you're doing a separate method, so that way you can gauge that for yourself. So for effectiveness overall, they are just as effective or even more effective than a lot of our synthetic birth control methods. So the thing with natural family planning and fertility awareness that some women do or do not know is that there's no requirement for any other type of birth control. So there's no barrier method that's needed. There's no type of synthetic hormonal birth control pill or implant or insert that's needed. It's strictly going off your individual fertility, working with it to figure out what you're doing when, and then to plan around that.
Yeah. And that leads into another question that I had is, can you use this in conjunction with other methods of birth control, whether that's synthetic birth control or a barrier method of birth control? I think a lot of people wonder about that even when they're curious about fertility awareness.
Absolutely. You 100% can. So, for example, with the barrier method is that for some, women, when they're not planning on becoming pregnant and their goals are not to conceive at this time, but they know exactly when they ovulate and their sex drive is high and they want to have, sexual intercourse with their partner, you can use a barrier method.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to change anything with the effectiveness of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not how natural family planning was designed, right? So you can use it in conjunction with, but the plan itself is not necessarily meant to be used with any kind of other birth control.
Yeah.
The same with like the pill or the implant. Mm-hmm. You can be on birth control. The only thing with if you're on a birth control that's say blocking estrogen,
mm-hmm.
You may or may not be having cycles. So that's going to be really hard to track, especially if you're just most of the time you're just having breakthrough bleeding. You're not actually having cycles because you're preventing the whole thing with hormonal birth control is to prevent estrogen rise, to prevent ovulation, right? So whereas with natural family planning, our whole premise of that is to track when you ovulate, right? So you can plan around that. So that would be the only caveat is if you're using a birth control pill, it may be harder to track just because, again, you're not really most of the time having actual periods, you're having withdrawal bleeding. So when and if you're not ovulating, that's going to be harder to track. If you're using like an IUD, same thing. If it's a copper, implant and there's no hormone added to it, you could more easily track your periods then.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, if people do use any type of birth control, it's usually a barrier method.
Mm-hmm.
And that won't affect the tracking because you're not putting any hormone on it. But again, like I said, I just have to say that because that is the design of natural family planning, is that it is designed to not be used with any kind of birth control.
Yes. And that is super helpful because that was, you hear about the way that synthetic or hormonal birth control works and that it does prevent ovulation. So I just wanted people to have all the information that, if you wanted to do this, you may not have your estrogen level rise or you may just be confused. You're like, I thought that my ovulation was going to be tracked and it's not. So
Right. And that's kind of the main thing I hear from a lot of women that I see in our practice is that, I stopped birth control because I was having all these side effects. I felt horrible on it. I didn't like the fact that I didn't know when my period was going to come and it was all random. And so that's kind of, again, another reason why natural family planning is becoming so popular today. And so many people are reaching out wanting to know more about it. It's because women are realizing that fertility is a beautiful thing. It's not broken. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be stopped, right? We just need to empower ourselves to know how it works, to work with it so we can help it, achieve our goals that way.
Yeah. And I loved how you said it works with you instead of like against you or like just against the design of your fertility and ovulation. So that is really cool. And I love that a lot of women are seeking to learn more about it.
Yes, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So how can fertility awareness methods empower women to know their bodies and plan their families?
Yeah. So, we've talked about this a little bit briefly about just the idea of, it's not, I really want women to understand it is not normal for you to not have a period every month. Again, unless you're taking some type of birth control that's preventing estrogen from rising, then that's a different story. But I've had so many women come to me who are not on any kind of birth control and they're like, oh, my doctor just told me that's normal for me because that's how I've always been. I'm here to tell you that's not true. That's not normal, right? And I'm not saying that doctor doesn't know what they're doing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you just need to maybe find another opinion or to dig a little deeper as to why that's happening to you and ask your doctor some questions, right? Because again, fertility for women is such a big sign of your overall health. Hormones affect so much. They affect weight. They affect mood. They affect just even some joints and overall memory too. A lot of women say, I have brain fog. I feel like maybe I have depression. I'm like, no, it's probably hormone related.
Yeah.
So much of what we go through as women and we take on ourselves as normal is really honestly a lot of times due to some type of hormonal imbalance that can easily be fixed a lot of times with diet changes or stress modification routines, things like that, to kind of help you get back in a normal rhythm. Another big thing that I tell women is that they think fertility awareness is only for when you are family planning. And I started it in high school. My mom had used it and taught me and had an instructor use it for me so I could learn how to track my body and how things worked. And it was actually how they diagnosed me with a very rare brain tumor that's only found in 1% of people my age. And I had been to specialist after specialist, and they had given me all kinds of hormones and tried to put me on birth control, all these other things. And my mom had said, no, something else is going on. And we finally went to a NAPRO doctor who specializes in fertility awareness. And this was actually an F&P who saw me, and she saw all the things I had tracked, and she knew about fertility awareness. And she said, oh my goodness, I think I know what this is. So she tested my prolactin levels, which for someone my age should be anywhere from 0 to 5 to 10. Mm-hmm. I was at 100. Wow. That's only happening if you're pregnant or if you were actually breastfeeding at the time, which I was neither. And so she said, oh my goodness, or you have pituitary tumor. And she said, I think you have pituitary tumor. Wow. So that day she got me in for an MRI, and I did. I had a very large pituitary tumor that if had gone undiagnosed, I would have lost my vision in about a year or so. So, and it all came down to me tracking and having this file of what was happening to my body when, for them to be like, I think something's off with this hormone. Let's check it. So it is great for family planning goals, but it's also just great knowledge for you to have. And if you take to the right doctor and you say, hey, look, this is what's been going on with my body, something's not right, then hopefully with the digging and figuring things out, we can make sure you get that optimal health care as well. That
is awesome. And so cool. Like, it's for so much more than family planning, it's one of our big signs of overall health, and that your mom did that for you and you were able to catch that is so wonderful. Like, what a gift that you were able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm so big. I tell people all the time, this is not just, again, like we mentioned, it is great for family planning. It's super effective. I've used it for that as well. But it is, again, we're here at this organization, we're so much about empowering women to know about their bodies and how they work. And so I'm so passionate about that for that specific reason.
Yeah. And so to kind of close us off, I have 2 more questions. So they're kind of tied together. So if I want to start using a fertility awareness method, where do I start? If someone's listening and just maybe a general, where do you start? And then if you're on a synthetic or hormonal form of birth control, what does that process to get off look like? And then tracking your cycle and it balancing itself out.
Yes, all great questions. So first, to just kind of start, what I would recommend is downloading an app on your phone where you can just kind of start when your period starts, when it ends, just your overall changes in your cycle. The app that I love is called FEMM, F-E-M-M, and it's actually established by an OBGYN who specializes in natural family planning and fertility awareness. And she has made it super user-friendly where you can just basically press buttons and say, today I'm feeling like this. Today I noticed my cervical mucus was this, or I'm on my period. And it will give you a little insert from the doctor about what that means, where you are in your cycle. Oh, it means that this is happening and this is why you feel this way. So it's a great educational tool, but also an easy way for you to get started. Doesn't cost anything. It's just a way for you to kind of track where you're at. The next step would be to, if you're really interested in learning a specific method, would be to Google. That's probably the easiest go-to. Google natural family planning instructors. And it will populate a website that you can go to, and you can put in where you live. A lot of times people will do virtual visits, so you don't even have to travel if you don't have one in your area. Or you can always call us. I can directly connect you, or you can work with me as a client if you want to as well. So those are some options there. That's how I would start to kind of get started. Now, if you are coming off of a synthetic birth control and you're not having cycles, and you're wondering, how do I kind of pull off of this? You can talk to your doctor first. So I would specifically go to your doctor and say, hey, look, I'm I'm not interested in doing this type of birth control anymore. I'm looking into natural family planning. Do you know what that is? And can you connect me with an instructor? Some doctors now, because like I said, natural family planning is becoming so popular, a lot of doctors actually have resources available for you. They just don't promote it as much because they're not aware of the need that women have for it right now. So if you ask, they might have an instructor that they can directly connect you with. So I would let them know. So far as coming off of it, there's really not like a whole lot of withdrawal symptoms necessarily. Your cycles just might take anywhere from 6 months to 9 months to a year. It varies per women to regulate. But when you work, that's why it's really important to work with an instructor who can help you know what's happening when, as your cycles are regulating again. As always, very, very, very important. Just because you're not having regular cycles does not mean that you may not be ovulating. So if you're coming off a birth control method and you do not want to become pregnant, it's very important that either you abstain from sexual intercourse. If you're not going to use any form of birth control, use a barrier method, or make sure you're working with an instructor who can tell you what's happening when to your body.
Yeah. That is such helpful information, and I hope that the women listening feel empowered and equipped to make these decisions about their health and try out a different path from the synthetic form of birth control. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. And then lastly, you're familiar with this question because we asked it to you last time as well, but we're talking about a different topic. So I figured I'd ask it again. But what kind of keeps you going to serve? What is your why for serving women in this capacity?
Yeah, I think in this specific capacity is because I've had so many women who've come to me discouraged, felt like they were failures because they're like, I just can't stay on birth control. And I'm so tired of the side effects and how I feel. But I'm not achieving my family planning goals because I don't know what to do. And there's just so much misinformation about your bodies. And I want to educate women and say, hey, no, there's hope on the other side of this. There's a tool out there that's going to help you learn about your body. You're not broken. You're beautiful. You are perfectly and wonderfully made. And we just need to learn your own personal fertility so that you can reach your goals the way you want to reach them, because you absolutely do not have to use synthetic birth control to reach your family planning goals if that's not the option for you. And so that's why I'm passionate about it, because not a lot of people talk about this. And I think more women need to, so that women know that one, this is an option available to you, but also it's such a great way for you to learn about yourself and empower yourself about your own health as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this information with our listeners. I can't wait for them to have this and get started making those family planning choices.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.